the Planning Committee meeting for today, August the 22nd. First item up is the addition of the supplemental, the pink. We have two. We have the supplemental package as well as the email from Sue Panton. So can I have a motion to amend the agenda with those two under correspondence?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Called to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. To start off this evening, we do have a presentation from Sarah Anthony, and I think staff are going to assist.
Did I turn it off?
You may have. So a couple of things. I suspect most of you are here tonight for this presentation. I could be wrong, but just a few sort of housekeeping points. First of all, Sarah, I'm going to time you. You got 10 minutes. It will come up later on in the agenda for council to discuss and or make a decision on in whatever fashion that is. Public participation will happen after your presentation. I would remind people tonight that to be courteous, and that some of the views that may or may not be expressed tonight you may or may not share them. However, this is a safe place for people to be able to express their opinions and obviously their concerns and their desires for our community. Sarah, take a deep breath. It's Machosen. We're a friendly group here. I've read the overview of your presentation. It's well done. Take a moment, and the floor is yours.
Okay. I'm not a very good public speaker in the sense that I get super nervous, so I'm basically just reading it out. I will flip this over. So this is about amending Bylaw 259 to include tiny homes and RVs as a secondary residence. So the struggle to find housing in Victoria and much of BC is nothing like I've ever seen in my lifetime. While Victoria has always been expensive, housing, one of the most basic human needs, is becoming more and more out of reach for far too many people. At one time, living in Victoria meant having a smaller house rather than a large one, living in an apartment instead of a house, renting a bachelor instead of a one-bedroom, maybe having a roommate instead of a studio. But now we're seeing more and more working people unable to keep a roof over their head. So why is this happening? Vacancy rates in Victoria have gone from 2.2% in 2020 to 1% and even 0.4% in the West Shore. This basically means there is nowhere to rent, and what there is available has become too expensive for the average worker. If you have a look on Facebook Marketplace, one bedrooms are ranging from $1,500 to $1,800, and two bedrooms from $1,800 to about $2,500, and actually much higher than that as well. And why is this? There's a lot of reasons. Some people blame Airbnbs, lack of public housing, private investors buying everything up. There's a lot of factors, but the reality is it is happening, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Some have tried to come up with some alternatives to keep themselves housed, such as living in an RV or a tiny home, but that has its challenges as well. RV parks have become overloaded. The wait lists are now up to 2 years for places like Fort Victoria. RV parks are often fine to rent out to long-term tenants in the off-season, but in the summer they up the rates to get the tourists in, and this results in a lot of people trying to find parking for the summer months or permanently if they can't get a space after that busy season. I've talked to a shocking amount of people who have been reduced to parking in side streets, have to move every day so they won't get ticketed. And I want to stress that the people I talk to who are in this situation are not people with no income. There are a lot on fixed income, sure, people with pensions, people on disability, and there are a lot with full-time jobs. One member of the housing crisis group I'm involved in, he actually worked for the BC government when he found himself living in his vehicle, and he's actually right here, Richard. It's nice enough to come, thank you. And he has now purchased an RV, but he's been constantly ticketed because he can't find a place to park. I think recently you were able to get a place, so that's really great. It took a long time. So, with all the tickets and everything, being homeless is not cheap at all. And then you imagine all the gas to have to move all the time and everything. It's really crazy. And I have talked to quite a lot of people like that. I actually should mention I've been admitting some housing crisis groups, and it's the stories I'm hearing from people. And these are people with jobs. They are not just I don't want to say just homeless people, because that sounds awful too. Everybody has their reasons that this is happening, but these are a lot of people who work in our community and they just can't get a place to live. Some of them have really good jobs. I'll get into that a bit later. Sorry, I get excited. So how is this affecting Metchosin? I think I might have a slide for that. So yeah, I'll get there. So with no other options, many of our workers are moving away. Not just our wait staff at our favorite restaurants or our grocery store clerks or our farm workers, but our tradespeople and even our doctors can't find houses. Last week, I had a guy pull over his BMW at our farm stand, and we got talking. He was super stressed. He was a stonemason, and he was just in absolute panic because he wasn't going to be able to keep renting where he was renting, and he couldn't find anything. Nothing. He wasn't going to be able to stay, and I've heard we need stonemasons and tradespeople. So my sister-in-law is an RN, and she told me that a lot of her colleagues are thinking of leaving because it's just too expensive here and they can't find a place. I've seen several Facebook posts for doctors looking for places to rent, and as you remember, we actually had a guy in here representing the doctors who said that housing is a concern. So I have this actually took me a really long time to figure out how to do on PowerPoint, so I hope you appreciate it. So who is struggling with housing insecurity? Pensioners, low-income workers, people on disability, students, but also middle-income workers. They talk about the missing middle. Teachers are leaving, medical staff, including RNs, restaurant staff. A lot of restaurants are closing because of this. The ferries, I probably should have put that in there. They're having a really hard time keeping people. And doctors. Doctors are having a hard time, and that should scare everybody. So what can Metchosin do? Obviously, we can't solve this whole thing. That's not what we can do, but we can maybe help a little bit, maybe ease some pressure, which is why I would like to ask City Council to consider amending Bylaw 259 to include RVs and tiny homes as a secondary dwelling. So to be very clear, what we're saying is each property would be allowed to have one additional dwelling in the form of a tiny home or an RV or a detached or detached suite. You're not getting an attached suite and a tiny home or whatever. I think there was maybe a bit of confusion about that. So yeah, this would not mean that you could have all of those things. You could basically, in lieu of having an attached or detached suite, you could rent out a tiny home pad or an RV pad. Or, I guess if you had your own for whatever reason, you could rent that out. So what is a tiny home? Oh, I just talked about that more.
Just as an FYI, you're about halfway through.
Okay, so that's what an RV looks like. I think everybody knows that. This is a family that I follow on YouTube, and they live in an RV, and they're very interesting. This is what a tiny home generally would look like. So what is it? It is defined as a small house under 500 square feet. Some are built on foundations, as you would a regular house or secondary suite, but many are built on a trailer frame and what is known as tiny home on wheels. Many of the tiny home manufacturers who build these build to CSA standards. So, and there is also something, so I put quite a few because I think they're really cool. That's the inside of a tiny home with a family in it, a bathroom that is amazing in a tiny home. And this is what is called a schoolie. So this is sort of an in-between. This is a school bus that's been converted, and these people had a very lovely dog. So who live in these places and why? So tiny home living is popular with mostly singles and couples, but some families also live in tiny homes or RVs with their children. They can be young or old, they can be working professionals or retired people. Most of them value sustainable living and want to have a low environmental impact. Most want to live in a rural setting. They're often minimalists and want to have a simple life. They want financial independence. While they may need to rent a pad, they feel like they can own their own home at least. So how does this benefit Metchosin? It provides a safe, affordable place for people to live who value the rural nature of Metchosin. Additional income with low investment. Building a suite is a lot of money. Setting up a pad has a lot less initial investment. Being able to keep your kids or local workers in the community who would otherwise leave for a cheaper market. And I have to stress, I talked to a lot of people who this was a big concern, was that this was a way that they could keep their kids. And a lot of them don't want to say anything because they're scared they'll get in trouble, because they do have their kids living there right now in this condition. For non-ALR properties, it's a cheap way to have workers live on the property if they need workers. A lot of tiny home tenants are really happy to help out. It creates a legal pathway to having a tiny home and RV dwelling that makes it easier for the city to inspect. And I think this is a really, really important point. We obviously do have these here right now, but we want to make sure that the water situation is safe and being not draining aquifers, and that the sanitation is being dealt with properly. And that also if people who are living there currently, which we know there are right now, that they don't need to worry about getting reported and losing their home. That the worst thing that happens is it gets inspected and brought into compliance. So, and another great thing about these is they have a low environmental impact. They're not permanent structures. So obviously a suite is. So when your tenants leave, they take your house with them. And that's them leaving. And then you have the land back to what it was before. So are they safe? I'll maybe try to speed up with this a little bit, and you can all maybe have a closer look. So there are codes. The province has been a bit funny about like kind of making a defined space for RVs and tiny homes, but we do know that they are using them for to create tiny home villages for homeless people in Victoria. And there definitely are tiny home villages popping up in rural areas around the province. So in a small numbers, but it is happening. RVs, for example, are certified to RV codes, and they are insurable for full-time living. So you can't, like if the insurance companies are okay with it, I think that's pretty good. Water, that's an important one. So they can be hooked up to existing plumbing, or if there's an issue with the water currently there, like the aquifer's not going to take it, it's possible to purchase a water tank and have it brought in. You can also set up rainwater barrels and stuff like that. So you can get a 3,000 gallon tank and have it delivered, and that lasts about 2 people 2 months or something like that. Sanitation is one of the biggest concerns that people have, and that is a big concern, and which is another reason why we should put this into regulations so that we can look at this. And a lot of the big thing with this is you could hook it into existing sewage if that is going to be a problem. Like, you know, obviously we would want people to inspect it and check it. And if that is not going to work, you can get sewage tanks and have the sewage trucked out.
Okay. You're finished your 10 minutes. So
Okay.
Do a quick wrap up, and then I'll open it up for committee to have questions for you. Okay. And then from there we'll move on to public participation.
Okay. So I'll just use my little closing points here. So like I said, none of these things are going to turn the housing crisis around. That's fair. Many of the factors that got us into this are going to take many actions from multiple levels of government. We can't keep saying it's someone else's responsibility though, because let's face it, it's affecting everyone one way or another. Amending this bylaw would alleviate some homelessness, and it is likely to open the door to more communities wanting to show that they can also do their part in this way. I don't think maybe more than 50, maybe 100 property, I would be very surprised if even that, people decided to take advantage of this. Can you imagine what it would mean though to those 50 or so people or couples? From the stories I've heard, it would mean a lot. And as I've mentioned, for a lot of people that are already living in tiny homes and RVs in Metchosin, it would mean safety. And it would also mean those sites would be inspected. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you did well for your first presentation to council. Thank you for that. So, sorry, Wendy, just before.
Can I just ask a question first? Everyone here knows who I am, but I will say Wendy Mitchell, 580 Woody Beach Road. And I don't actually know who the person is that was presenting. I don't know where she lives. I know that you referred to her as Sarah, and I didn't hear her introduce herself.
Wendy's not wrong. So on your agenda, it's Sarah Anthony, and as a usually for presenters have them do their name, or their name and address, but it's fine. Yeah. If you wanted to come back up to the podium, we'll ask for some questions from mayor and council. So typically what happens, what Wendy was referring to was at our meetings we do for recording purposes, take names and addresses. So I'm sorry, I was remiss in asking. So please state your name.
I knew that, and I probably should have done that. Yeah, Sarah Anthony, 4290 Metchosin Road.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to committee. Is there any questions that you would like to ask Sarah at this time? Nope. Okay, so you're off the hook for the time being. Tom?
Mayor and Councilor, Thomas Cole, 3960 Hibbert Lane. I'm going to let you know that our home was built 25 years ago. It was the first house in Machosen that was built with a legal suite in it, and it went through council. I would let you know that my septic field was doubled. My field was doubled. It cost me over $14,000 just for my septic field. And I am for changing the bylaw. However, we have to be very, very careful when it comes to septic and also sewer removal. We don't want to try to ruin the aquifer that we already have. So when it comes to changing the bylaw, I'm for it, and I'm for the tiny homes, and I'm also for having RVs. We don't want to turn it into a jungle, and we want to try to make sure we protect our aquifer. So somewhere when you're trying to change the bylaw, you have to write in there about septic and septic removal. Thank you.
Thank you. We're into public participation. You're up.
Go ahead.
Mine's very short. Mine's very short and has nothing to do with the topic. I just wish to, I would hope with the new system this wouldn't be necessary. I wish to remind council members to speak directly into your microphone, please, because otherwise it's very hard to hear you. Thank you. Oh, and press your button. Thank you.
Which button?
It's the blue button, which I don't have as chair, which is why this microphone is on all the time. I followed your lead, which is what got me into trouble at the last meeting, Mayor Rance. Jay.
Jay Shukin, 5340 Levon Road, and also speaking as president of the Association for the Protection of Rural Machosen. So thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. Well done. The APRM has carefully considered this concept, and we've been thinking about it for quite some time. I have to say we do not believe that a change is in the best interest of Machosen, a change to the bylaw. And we've outlined those reasons in a letter sent to council. This is also on our website as well. I'll just summarize some of those points here. So first of all, tiny homes and RVs are not anywhere near comparable to detached secondary suite, and certainly not a secondary suite within a house. So the premise that RVs and tiny homes and the regulations binding them could stand with a detached secondary suite in Section 23 of the Land Use Bylaw is really dubious to our perspective. Now, for example, detached secondary suites require significant investment by the property owners. They require building permits, which require plans and plumbing and structural and electrical inspections. The investment made for that structure is often done so that structure will stand for decades, if not a century. There's a foundation for living, both in literal and figurative terms. That's not the case with a tiny house, which can be tiny house on wheels, which can be moved onto a property within hours. And while they're not necessarily cheap, the level of investment in a tiny house is simply not the same as a detached secondary suite. Now, I mentioned foundation. As RVs and tiny homes on wheels are not considered permanent structures, there is no applicable taxes at the municipal level in allowing these alternative structures to serve as dwellings. So the property owner may receive a rent, but that's a matter between him and the federal government in terms of taxes. There's no municipal implications in terms of increased taxes. So essentially, what you're having is the potential of a bylaw amendment leading to, with allowing tiny homes and RVs to serve as secondary dwellings. That could see our population increase significantly, while the ability to pay for services like policing would essentially remain stagnant. And further, what this means is that you create a situation where residents living in permanent homes are subsidizing those living in alternative dwellings. And good luck with changing that regulation in terms of the taxation, because you're looking at a change probably in the BC legislature to the BC Assessment Act. So while we sympathize with those who are facing housing affordability issues, and many of us have family in a situation where they are living in precarious housing, we question whether allowing tiny homes and RVs will actually serve those impacted by housing affordability issues. And the proposal here seems to be based on the premise of having a socially conscious private landowner doing three things. First of all, hosting that alternative housing. Second, ensuring that that housing actually goes to people who are worthy of that alternative housing. And by Sarah's presentation, it seems to be well-intentioned, hardworking people who are facing housing issues. And third, that the rent for that remains affordable. And with the bylaw power available to the municipality, you cannot compel private landowners to do any of those things. I would suggest that the real opportunity here is not for affordable housing options, but for private landowners to develop short-term vacation rental suites or simply rental spots for RVs and fifth wheels. And a very likely outcome is that simply the rents find themselves elevated in a way that they are throughout the CRD. So three more things, very quickly. We do have deep misgivings about this proposal. Things like district resources to manage this program, sanitation and environmental impacts, and the fact that Metchosin is far from the ideal place to develop housing affordability options, given our distance from job centers, schools, and the limited public transportation that we have. So sorry, almost done here. I will close by saying that Metchosin has already made a major contribution to providing land for affordable housing. Recall that the 2017 land swap between Metchosin, Langford, and Beach Bay resulted in 350 acres being withdrawn from Metchosin, turned over to Langford, and there's 80 acres that is now under construction in terms of developing 280 new homes built in a cluster fashion. So we urge council to not move ahead with the amending the land use bylaw. Introducing ad hoc housing solutions will have potentially serious and adverse impacts on Metchosin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay.
Diana Smith, 4488 William Head Road. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my partner, Dorothy Elias. So, Mayor and Council, my partner, Dorothy Elias, and I would like to support the proposal brought to Council by Sarah Anthony for the legal ability to have either one tiny house, one RV, or a secondary suite in Metchosin for all the reasons that she outlined. And I also wanted you to know we're not planning to, if there is a bylaw like this, we're not planning to take advantage of it, so we're not speaking from self-interest. We would ask Mayor and Council to seriously consider how this proposal can best be enacted, making sure issues of health and safety, including the fire safety, can be properly addressed and done in a timely manner. The APRM has made many points against the proposal, so the remarks I'm going to make are mostly in reaction to what some of the things they have said. So we support the proposal for the following reasons. Everyone present doesn't need statistics to know there's a housing crisis at all levels to do both with affordability and supply. People at the bottom of the housing chain, those that can only afford to rent a small dwelling, deserve and need housing as much or more so than all of us with the privilege to own property and housing in Metchosin. This is not a Victoria housing problem, it's not a Langford housing problem or a Metchosin housing problem or anywhere else's problem. It's a global problem, and what we can think. And while we can think globally, we can best act locally. I also live near the cafe, and the number of ads for housing in Metchosin there's always tons of them there. People trying to find places to live here. This is a modest and doable proposal. As Sarah said, it's not going to solve the issue, but would provide a little bit of help. The RPRM response to the proposal is disappointing on many levels. It says Metchosin is not an ideal location to have affordable housing. We beg to differ. What a great place to come home to after either working locally. For instance, my chosen cafe had to close a while back because they couldn't get enough staff. and volunteer firefighters, I hear, are desperate for accommodation in Metchosin. So you either are working locally or commuting from surrounding neighborhoods. And for working people, commuting is very common. You know, it's not a, you know, it's people who work are used to commuting. Working people in Metchosin commute now. Commuting is often a reality, especially for lower paid workers. The APRM says that one reason our little bit of paradise is not suitable is because of limited transit. First of all, if more people already living in Metchosin left their cars at home and used transit, we may have an improved service and we would be helping the environment. The only person I've ever known in Metchosin to use transit was Joel Usery, who doesn't live here anymore. Use it or lose it. Tiny house renters who couldn't afford vehicles would be helping the environment, helping us justify better transit and providing a much needed good example. Also, I recall a presentation made by BC Transit to this council on how they are currently improving the service. Environmentally speaking, tiny house and RV renters can be a huge inspiration to us. People have made points, they're vastly different to secondary suites. Well, that is the point. They are so, you know, they don't have such a big environmental impact as a secondary suite. They're not as expensive as you were saying. They could have a much smaller environmental footprint. Likely as not, they also can't afford, people who live in them can't afford to fly or own recreational vehicles, so we're not ruining the planet with air miles or road miles. Some tiny house and RV dwellers choose to live this way, not because they can't afford anything but bigger, but because of the low environmental impact. If only more of us would follow this example. If Metchosinites are worried about tiny houses and RVs, they should look around. There are many of both in Metchosin with little worry of consequence from the district right now. If there were a bylaw allowing one tiny house or RV, it wouldn't be the present people who have illegal RVs and tiny houses who would apply for permission. They likely wouldn't want to invite inspection of their property. It is people who want to legally offer one safe place for someone to live. That's, I'm guessing. The APRM says that the rural nature of Metchosin means bigger distances to amenities. Of course, we know that. Tiny house users choosing to live here probably would see the joy of living here worth the inconvenience, just like the rest of us. They would work things out just like the rest of us. The RPM says achieving affordable housing goals are uncertain. There's no more reason why tiny house and RV owners will be or should be more or less responsible than all other landlords, but any increase in housing will have an overall positive effect. Although,
Diane?
Yes?
Sorry, I was trying to
My
find it.
time's up?
It's well up, so it is not, and you're doing well, it's just there's a lot there, so perhaps you could...
Last sentence.
Okay.
Let's do what we can to be part of the solution. Let's share the wealth in a responsible way.
If I could ask, maybe you could email that to staff tomorrow?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I am going to bring in the 4-minute rule. So next speaker, I'm timing, so to those who have to keep it to those 4 minutes.
How about I keep it to about 2 minutes?
Okay. I'll time you anyways and let you know.
Jennifer Burgess, 3837 Duke Road. And I'm not speaking from paper, so this may be a little convoluted. However, I think that there may be one perspective that council needs to take a little step back and think about adding to this conversation and the discussion. And I would say that council needs to review several areas of assisted housing that is being developed. First of all, the agricultural land reserve have come up with an increase in their ability to house workers who will be working in farms. Now, let's face it, we are a farm-oriented community, so it'd be interesting to see if we can look at what ALR is doing for their farm land areas. And we have many, many properties that are farm status. I'm not talking specifically of ALR, but properties that are farm status where about a dozen sheep go into a property every now and then, and over the year they're allowed to have much lower taxes than I have. The advantage, though, here would be certainly, I think, to enhance the ability of these small farmers to find the staff that they need and be able to provide for the same kind of ambiance that we want in this community. So I'd just like to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. Minute 40.
I don't have any prepared notes on this, and I think it was a very good presentation that Sarah made, but I'm against it. And I think this is such a big issue. This is as big as the secondary housing issue that really divided Machosen, and we ended up in a public hearing. And I would hate to see this outgoing council make any decision on this. I think it's big enough to deserve a public hearing. We've done our share, as Jay has mentioned, we've done our share for housing by saying that every property can have an in-house suite or a detached secondary suite. That's our contribution. We don't want to attract a whole lot of temporary, transient people. That's not how you build community. There's a boon for the property owner because they're collecting rent with very little outlay. Maybe they'll put a cement pad in and hook up some services, and then they get to collect rent on this. But it's a cost to the district. As Jay pointed out, the district would have more people and not another dime of property tax to pay for the services. We don't want to be housing a lot of transient and temporary people. We want to build community, and we want there to be a balance between the property owners paying taxes and the services that are required. And this is tipping the scale the wrong way. So I would like council to kick this down the road to the next council, and then let it be treated with the seriousness that it deserves, because it would be a big change in our community as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Just before the next speaker, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that you'd said. So first of all, thank you very much for acknowledging Sarah's presentation and for your remarks as well. Just so that process-wise, as far as the public knows, any change to our land use bylaw requires a public hearing. So this proposal would be something that would require a change to the land use bylaw, which would then trigger a public hearing process, which includes advertisement, which includes a whole host of things. So it's not something that can be done quickly regardless of whether we had an election coming up in 2 months or not. It is a process that has to be followed. This is an initial presentation. It's being made to this council. The council of the day is still relevant. And so it will be up to the next council to decide how to proceed further, but it is perfectly acceptable for it to be presented now, and we can start the conversation. But there is an entire process that has to happen for a change to the land use bylaw.
Thank you.
Cool. Next speaker.
Anita Strauss, 1195 Woodley Gill. It was a very interesting presentation. It's very slickly done. Well done, Sarah, and your partners, I presume. But I'm also opposed to it, partly for the reason of building community. We don't want to turn Machosen into a gigantic RV park. If we want to do RV, and with the loss of Petter Bay, there was a whole bunch of people that got displaced. There still is Wears Beach, but that's not very much. But basically, I don't see anything in the bylaw, and I'm not an expert at this, but I don't see anything in the bylaw that prevents you from installing as a secondary detached suite, a tiny home or RV. It's just that if you do that as a secondary suite, which I would advise that we enforce, is that you have to make sure that you have the proper septic involved. You have to make sure that it's not going to impact the aquifer unduly, and that it's safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And plus it gets put on the assessment of the property, and therefore there is taxes paid to Machosen to pay for the service that these people will consume. They will take fire, they will take roads, they will take the police, they will take our parks. And we welcome them. This is not a matter of not welcoming people. It's a matter of saying that this is a community We all pitch in together, and I'm not prepared to have hundreds, dozens, I don't know how many would actually take this up. I don't see why the rest of us have to subsidize a style of living that that isn't paying anything into the community to help the community thrive. I have a small house. It's not quite tiny, but it's very, very small. And I pay my taxes, and I'm quite happy to do that because I want to be part of this community. I think that we need to be very careful about what we're appealing to here. We cannot solve a systemic problem like poor housing. The solution to it, quite frankly, is to eradicate greed. I mean, people build, and people say, oh, well, we can do subsidized housing for poor people here in Metchosin, and we'll build a secondary suite. And then they charge $1,500, $1,800. Well, if you really were that altruistic, you would charge $300. But that's not what's happening, right? So I don't see why, if people, that's what we need to address. What we need to address is the fact that people are trying to monetize their properties, and that's fine up to a point. This is a rural community, and I don't think that as a community building exercise, I already have a bed and breakfast. I have a farm, grow up, that has a number of trailers that are allowed because they are workers for his grow up, right? I have lots of transient people in my neighborhood already, and if everybody else starts adding a portable thing, then we're going to have more. Essentially, I don't see any reason why you can't have a tiny home. I would like to put a tiny home on a proper built foundation with proper resources to make sure that septic, because remember that even if you have composting toilets, as her letter actually talked about, that's a hazardous waste. And if that is not done, disposed of properly, and if these are wild all over the place and Metchosin can't police them, what's going to happen is that somebody's going to end up with contaminated land. The cost of remediation that will be so much that they will walk away with it, and the district will be left with contaminated soil all over Metchosin. We already have a number of dumps that have the same issue. So I am opposed to the rental temporary nature of this proposal. I am not opposed. I think it's a great idea. Put a tiny home on a foundation, put an RV on a foundation. Those are great alternative housing, and they do cost much less, but don't be deluded that they do not have environmental impact. They have the same amount of impact as anything else on the soil and on the environment. What they are reducing is the amount of materials used to construct them. That's the only difference.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Anita. Well done. Okay. Just as a quick note, Stephen, before you start, I've just been advised that once we hit 8 o'clock, it is 45 minutes of public participation. So depending on how the conversation is going, I may or may not extend it at that time.
Good evening. Stephen Sawyer, 1498 Neald Road. It's been a few years since I've come to a council meeting, and I'm glad to be back here for this one. And I don't want to address the presentation directly, but I would like to ask a few rhetorical questions. We came to Metchosin because we like the rural ambience. We love the ruralness. But how do we know how much is rural? Or how do we measure our ruralness? Do we have any key performance indicators that say this is the acceptable level of ruralness, this is not? Do we have some things like our traffic light, for example, would be a thin edge of the wedge, and we say, right, that's not acceptable because it's not rural. So do we have anything that says that measures these kinds of things? And we probably don't. Can we do it? I don't know. Would it be hard to do? Yes, it probably would. But I'm just, because of where I live, I get impacted by what's happening in our neighbor Langford, for all the noise and everything that's happening on Dudney Flats and all of that kind of stuff. And so there are impacts that we don't have any control over, but there's also some impacts that we do have control over. So in a bigger picture, how do we measure our degree of ruralness? And the secondary suite issue, I recall it being a huge bone of contention and a bit of a divisiveness within the community. And this presentation and this proposal has the potential to go along a similar path. I'm not for or against it at this point in time. I'd have to do a lot more thinking about it. But people have brought up some good points on both sides of the equation here, and I'm just wondering how much ruralness do we want? How do we measure it, and what do we do about it? And I'll leave that in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard the term ruralness before.
No, I think I invented it.
Okay.
Kathy Salute, 900 Neff Road. I just wanted to make a point here, adding to Anita's thing. A rural area, each property is unique. You don't know if there's a seasonal creek running through one. You look at the diagrams of that young boy that did all those creek maps and materials, and you have to be really, really careful. You don't know if you're living next to somebody whose well is just barely producing, and if you double that, what's coming out of the ground, you can affect the person beside that. So you can't make a blanket decision on properties that are rural, because each one is unique, as well as the diversity of animal life, plant life, insect life that comes through there. And we who've lived here all these years, we all value that. So I want you to think about that. Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. Anyone else?
I really support this motion. I think that
I believe it's Eric. Right?
Oh, Eric White, 4290 Machosen Road. Everybody's worthy of a roof over their head. What Machosen can do with the least amount of impact and footprint is probably the best approach to help a larger problem. And a way to solve problems like believing that these people won't be contributing their tax dollars is to put something like an annual inspection fee and say $500 per secondary or tiny home, and say there's 100 in Machosen, that's like $50,000 a year. That almost pays for one new staff member, which could essentially look over all of them in a day, and then he's got the rest of the year to do other Machosen tasks, and it would actually benefit our community as a whole. I think it's also super important for the safety of our community in the future, as we need to attract young people who want to be here, and we also need to protect our elderly people who want to stay here. And tiny secondary homes are a great way to have someone near you who can, generally look over your property and say, oh, they're doing all right today, or their sheep are still in, or oh, it's all good today, right? It's a great way to protect everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Atherton, 4995 Laban Road. So, dear Mayor, Rans, and Council, I'm speaking to the letter and presentation from Sarah Anthony regarding the proposed amendment to include tiny homes and RVs in bylaw number 259. On reading the current bylaw, I don't actually see anything that already prohibits the use of an RV or tiny home in place of a detached secondary suite on any property greater than 1.98 acres. It's commendable to want to create more housing for those struggling to find a place to live. However, the potential outcome is that these cute tiny homes could actually become nothing more than short-term Airbnbs. To quote from Sarah's letter, most tiny homes are actually quite cute and built to fit a rural aesthetic. While you may not love the look of RVs, they are everywhere anyway. Every other property in Machosen is storing 5 of their closest friends' RVs for them. So, speaking of which, perhaps someone from staff or council can clarify if there is a limit to the number of RVs that can be parked on property for storage, and are there any regulations on whether those RVs in storage are actually being used or can be used as residences on the properties. And therein lies the problem. With our complaint-driven bylaw enforcement policy, there is going to be an onus on neighbors to be seeing to it that the regulations pertaining to any tiny homes and RVs are adhered to. We already have enough conflict in Machosen regarding bylaw enforcement and the whole complaint-driven policy. And if you add more tiny homes and RVs to this, I think you're going to accentuate that problem. There's already legal provisions for secondary dwellings on most properties in Metchosin. Let's work within the existing framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Carrie?
Oops. My name's Carrie Hill, 4203 Leron Place. Speaking to council as a long-term, 21 and a half plus years resident of Metchosin, a previous landowner as well in Metchosin, and a farmer for all of that 21 plus years. I am not a transient nor a difficult or, I don't know, homeless resident. I have raised 4 of my children here. I'm facing homelessness due to factors that are not in my control coming up this spring. As a farmer and a person who has livestock, I am not able to find housing anywhere outside of this district to house my children and my large animals, small animals. Sannage, it's unaffordable. I am fully in support of this bylaw. It would be great to own my own RV on somebody's property where I would be able to have a long-term livable situation where I had a pad rental. I would totally and completely accept that, as well as being able to increase the value and of a person's property and help them out on their farm as well. Well, the loss of housing in our community is huge. I am one of many people that will lose their housing this spring or this year. And I'm unable to find anywhere else. So that is a concern for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. We've reached 8 o'clock. Chris, I would never.
Last time you folks gave me 5 minutes, so this is like
just as an
under 2.
FYI, Chris is a former colleague.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And there is no way I would ever cut her off at the microphone.
Chris Moore, 4545 William Head Road. Obviously, I'm here to speak to Sarah's presentation, and you know my position on this. I've made it clear. I think it's broadly shared, but we'll find out. I'm here to endorse the comments that I've heard primarily from Jay Shukin and Anita Strauss, and a few others. Anyway, as I said, I've spoken to this at length a number of weeks ago, so I'm not going to repeat the thrust of that message other than to restate that Metchosin, as you all know, has the earliest adopted and most liberal residential housing bylaws in the entire CRD. That's to our credit. That's been there for 30 years. I don't want to prompt a debate because this is not the venue, but I've got a question to the promoters this evening is, what's your problem, frankly? What precisely in our existing bylaw, particularly 259, as they apply to residential dwellings, prevents a version of the tiny, or shall I say small home, but please on a more permanent, less itinerant basis, and one that we can manage, make sure that it is operating the way it's supposed to be, a la our detached secondary suites. And I don't believe that there is a minimal size attached to that. If this is leading to an increase in density, and it will quite possibly do that, and these folks are expecting some kind of wholesale adoption of this very vague concept, I can assure you that the vast majority of Metchosin residents is not remotely interested. I guess that will be tested. The bigger concern for Metchosin residents, I think, as you know, is the apparent lack of enforcement of our land use bylaws as they currently exist. And until we get our heads around that one and have it properly managed, there's no way anybody should go down this path. I trust, or at least hope, that you as our current elected officials will recognize that this in its presented form is a non-fit for this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. May I just get a quick poll? How many other speakers would like to speak? Okay, then you'll likely be my last speaker, so if you can come to the podium.
Hey, Bradley Russell.
Sorry, I didn't catch your first name.
Bradley Russell. Honored to be here speaking to the council. 4730 Eels Road. I just wanted to say I actually moved to a tiny home in Machosen because I didn't have community in Victoria, because I had nothing but people that didn't around me that didn't really appreciate where I was living in Victoria, and obviously the pressure of bills and everything was too much for a lot of people. So I actually moved out here to a friend's property so that I could have more community, so I could cut down on my impact on the environment, so I could we have our own water brought in. I deal with my own compost toilet myself. I've actually done it at other properties before. It's super simple. It's no more difficult than taking a horse poop and putting it in a stall the same way. It's not like some big environmental thing. So I think it's interesting that there's a privileged point of view about this that doesn't really know what it's like to actually live in this situation. And I must say that there's two sides of this, and obviously I think it needs more evaluation, and I appreciate that you guys are looking into it, and I appreciate that you've let Sarah speak tonight, and thank you for your time.
With that, at this point, unless there's someone who has something idealistically new to add, I'm going to move on to the next part of our agenda. And also, I would like to say thank you to Sarah, our presenter, and to all of you who have spoken tonight. This has probably been one of the most enlightening and enjoyable discussions I think that we've had in regards to something that could possibly be controversial, but is not necessarily. So again, thank you very much for your comments and your presentations tonight. Okay, so we have, moving on then to adoption of our minutes. We have one that came up from the April 11th meeting. We have received it at council, but it hasn't actually been adopted at this committee. So can I have a motion, please, to approve? Probably both can be done, April 11th and July 18th. Okay, moved by Mayor Rands, seconded by Councillor Epp. Called to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the DVP for 1290 Neil Road. First thing I would say is probably we should, actually I'll ask, is the applicant present? Okay, perfect. Did you want to speak to this? You can, or you can answer questions of the committee. I can answer questions. Okay, perfect. One of the first things I'll say is we probably would like to schedule a site visit. Would that be?
Hello, Warren Littlejohn, 1290 Neil Road. Certainly a site visit is welcomed. Yeah, we can accommodate that.
Okay, excellent. Committee, what's your wish? Mayor Rands?
I don't even think that a site visit is necessary. The report is very thorough, and the reasons for the variance, which is slight, make perfect sense to me. So I'm happy to move the options.
First option would be, I think the one you're trying to refer to is request that staff send notices to landowners within 60 meters of the property, informing them of the application and the September 12th, 2022 council meeting when issuance of the permit will be considered.
And that gives opportunity for neighbors to weigh in on it.
Well, the applicant is required to petition his neighbors, and I believe you've already started that process, if not completed it. Can I have a seconder to the motion we can discuss? Councillor McKinnon? Councillor Little?
Yeah, in the options, it'll be September 19th. It won't be the September 12th meeting. And I would be in favor of a site visit. I think we should always have a site visit for variance applications to do our due process.
there's nothing prohibiting us from moving forward on this recommendation for the 19th. Thank you. We will be at UBCM on the 12th. And that in between that time period, if staff can arrange with you and members of council that wish to have a site visit.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. With that, I'll call the question on the motion. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you.
I think it will be Tina that will probably get a hold of you to find some dates and times that are suitable for you, and then we'll coordinate council's scheduling.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next item up on the agenda is the presentation that Sarah and Anthony made. Is there a wish from this committee, or at this point are we receiving the information? I'm happy to jump in here and there's nobody else from committee. There you go.
Wow. This is a little awkward, having to hold your finger on the button, but
But I can hear you so much.
yeah. Well, the reality is that the CRD, it's a red button that we have to push in order to activate the microphone. So I've been pushing the red button, so that shows you how much attention I've been paying to Lisa. Yeah, I think that I would move receipt of this. This is obviously an item for the next council, but I would like to kind of just comment on it.
That's fine.
If I may.
Yep.
If there's a seconder to the receipt motion. Yeah.
Seconded by Councillor McKinnon.
It's interesting to me that, and I think you've recognized it as well, Chair, that this is a lot like the detached arguments that we faced when we had to when we went through the detached suite issues, and it was divisive, and there were a lot of very strong opinions one way or the other. And I'm certainly glad that I'm not going to have to deal with this one. So, but what I see here, first of all, I was quite heartened to see the people who feel as strongly as I do that Metchosin should not be expected to undertake urban problems. We're a rural community. We provide rural things. Affordable housing is far better suited into the municipalities that are already urban. But I don't see this as so much as an affordable housing issue in the classic sense. I think that the RV aspect of this makes sense to me. The tiny homes, well, you've got building code issues and everything else. So I kind of think the tiny homes issue is something for the future once the province gets its head around tiny homes and everything else. But from an RV perspective, it as long as it meets the codes, and I know Tom spoke about the septic and everything else, and of course anything like that, if we were to approve, or we or the future council were to approve having a third edition to the bylaw, which says you could either have, as explained, an attached suite, a detached suite, or in what I'm recommending would be an RV pad. All of them have to meet the codes. So you would have to have the septic disposals, all of the health and safety issues met, all of the various codes. But the advantages to it, and I go back to the arguments that we made during the detached suite issue. The advantages to the RV addresses a lot of the concerns with the attached suite or the detached suite issues, in that they're very easily removed. A person can put the pad in, meet the codes, probably won't be cheap because of meeting the codes, but still cheaper than building a detached suite. And once you build the detached suite, it's there. You're never going to move it. It costs so much to build them that you are adding a permanent structure, an additional permanent structure to the residence. With an RV pad, you're not. All you're adding is a cement pad and the hookups. And because of that, it makes it a lot easier to deal with bylaw issues, to deal with any difficulties that might accrue from it, because you can just simply tell them to get it off. And you're not creating anything that will be permanent. You're not creating an argument, and this was another argument that was made, and another reason why when we created the bylaw in the first place, we said you have to have it within 50 feet, I guess it was. What was it? It's 15 meters or something? Yeah, of the primary residence. And part of the reason, well, one of the reasons is that the homeowner has to live with the problems that come from the tenants that they bring in. But the second reason is that we didn't want any excuses, any hardship reasons to come back in the future for future subdivision. And we believed that if we had a common driveway and it was close to the residence, then you couldn't say in the future, well, I have to be able to subdivide this and, for these hardship reasons. The RV pads provide that. There are no hardship reasons to subdivide, because these are temporary RVs that are owned by the person generally that would be parking on the pad. So I think that the RV aspect of this solves a lot of the concerns that we had with the permanent detached. So, I mean, there was a statement made that our firefighters can't have a place to live. Well, I mean, that has been a problem that the chief has been concerned about for years, is that we rely on our youth firefighters to put in 5 years service, 4 years service to the community, and then we realize that they're going to move on. Well, this provides these opportunities. So it solves problems, a number of problems really, and I don't believe that as was the concerns were that the whole community was going to change with the detached. Well, that didn't happen. I mean, we only have a handful of people that actually built the detached. And I don't think that it's going to be that much of an impact with an RV pad either. So I would hope that the next council at least takes it to a public hearing so that the public can weigh in on it and looks at the advantages as well as the disadvantages. I don't, as somebody that has been committed most of my adult life to keeping this place rural, I don't believe that this is going to be a compromise to any of the rural nature of this community. So anyway, sorry to take so long on that, but I'm only going to get another chance.
Well,
we got one more meeting, so.
I will say, for those in the room who are considering running for council, it's very possible that should this matter come forward and it does go to public hearing, you may actually be hearing from retired Mayor Rands at that point in time. But anyways.
I hope not.
You'd be surprised. Any other comments? Sorry, Councilor McKinnon, I didn't see your hand come up.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who spoke tonight. I was very impressed. I know we've got some very different opinions in this room, and we heard an awful lot of people speak very passionately and very eloquently tonight with some very different viewpoints on these issues. And mostly what I could see was everybody listening carefully to all of these well-reasoned arguments. And that's an ideal democratic situation. It doesn't get any better than that. So thank you everybody for that. I agree with Mayor Rands. Obviously this is going to, if this moves forward, it's going to require a large public meeting. We're going to have to convene the community. It is going to be another divisive issue, and it's not something that's going to happen in the next 6 weeks. At the same time, I'm wondering what we can do to ensure that our next council, who will be the ones who are giving this serious consideration or not, it will be up to the next council, of course. If there's what we can do between now and then to help make their task simpler. one of the things that occurred to me tonight is that we've heard very different opinions on things like the impact of these changes on the population of Metchosin. The financial implications of this kind of change with respect to our inability to apply property taxes to some of these other modes of accommodations, and as Chair of Finance, what that might mean to Metchosin and to all of the other taxpayers. And it would be nice to have some clarity around some of these issues moving forward for whoever is considering this issue in the future.
If I may, we have both staff members beside me have been taking notes vigorously, and both of them, as well as we're having this recorded. I would suspect that the next council, this is one of the things that's probably going to be coming up forward with the council orientation, and part of that would be then to sort of instruct the new council as to how they move forward, asking for staff reports. And the points that have been made tonight, and I do agree with you, like there was a wide range of opinions and points made on all sides of the aspect, that those pieces of information are then compiled and brought forward to the next council to start to consider. So tax implications, whether or not it's looking at just simply RV pads, sort of drilling down as to what it is that would be brought forward to the next council for consideration, and ultimately to the public during a public hearing process. So I don't suspect that over the next 6 to 8 weeks that this item is going to be lost. I suspect, in fact, there will be further conversations both at this table and during the election process. So I can't imagine that this item would not be coming forward to the next council to deal with, at least to get started on at the very beginning of their term. So I'm going to do first-time speakers, Councillor Epp, Councillor Little, and then Mayor Rance.
Well, there are a lot of communities around BC in general and all over that are considering this issue, I think, as we speak. So we had it was great to hear all the opinions tonight and all the ideas. There's certainly a lot of them, but I think that it'll be really important to work with other communities and work with the province to deal with all the pros and cons of these issues. The taxation, the inspections, not avoiding backyard campgrounds, and so on. So I'm hoping that some of us are going to the UBCM conference in September, and this might be a really good chance for us to discuss this issue with some of the other communities and just see how it's progressing, because I think it's a bigger issue than just Metchosin, and when we base our decisions, I think it should be on something that we get a lot of opinions from a lot of different places to really make the best decision on what to do here.
Thank you. Good point. Councillor Little.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation, and I thank everybody for your comments on both sides. It's been very insightful for me. So I recognize that there's a significant housing affordability pressures on the Capital Regional District. I recognize that this correspondence and proposal is a conversation starter, and I see it as that, a conversation starter, and that's where it should stop. This should be for the next council, absolutely. I think we should collate all the comments and pass it on to the next council as has been suggested. Right now, knowing what I know, I have dire concerns about the safety and the fiscal implications for the district. These have already been stated, so I won't belabor it. Safety. It was said that if an insurance company is okay with it, we should be okay with it. Well, I'd rather be our fire chief and the fire department be okay with it, and the codes be okay with it. We do have a very fragile aquifer 606. Even if you're trucking in the water's coming from somewhere. So that's a concern of mine. Safety and fiscal, as I've mentioned, is my major concerns. In this agenda package on page 26, we do have a bylaw enforcement update. And Councillor Kahakawila, you did state that the noise So this was regarding May 16th Planning Committee meeting. For further discussion, Councillor Kahakawila stated that the noise bylaw is still work in progress, and there are a few other bylaws that need to be dealt with first, like the tree cutting bylaw. We haven't seen either. We're at the end of the term. I was a bit surprised to see this on here, although it's not wrong. It's a conversation starter. But there are other bylaws. The bylaw 259, I've got it here. It's very comprehensive. It's over 100 pages long. It's complex. And I think we would need, or the next council actually needs to go through it thoroughly with public input and public implication. And I also wanted to agree with Diana Smith that this is not a Langford or a Metchosin problem. However, I respectfully disagree with one of my elders that the District of Metchosin actually does show a lot of compassion. I am appointed as the commissioner for the CRD Regional Housing Trust Fund. That we haven't met for over a year, but we have moved to adopt affordable and market rate and apartments and building of such, and so that is a contribution that we have made with a commissioner on the Regional Housing Trust. I'm also, speaking of compassion, I'm the chair of the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice, so I do think that this council does show compassion in a broader sense of the word. And also, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that we did, as the president of the APRM suggested, that we did contribute land that will be used very shortly to over 250 homes, and it is a contribution. And as the councillor with farming in my portfolio and agriculture, I do worry about the encroachment on valuable farmland. The Agricultural Land Commission, the ALC, has moved to increase the availability or the regulations for farmers to add additional housing for their farmers if they so choose. So I thank you for this conversation starter, but it's very complex to amend a bylaw like this, especially when we've got other bylaws we've been dying to get at. So thank you.
No, and thank you very much for bringing those two bylaws up. I will just comment on that. First of all, the noise bylaw is one that it was something that we knew that could be, that may end up having to be pushed back because of other things that came up as a bigger priority. Some of that is the fact that we've had a new planner take over, and the priority for our planner is dealing with applications, and that council projects it comes next. So the noise bylaw is a council project that I brought forward, and so it got shelved while the planner was dealing with immediate matters that needed to be dealt with. As far as the tree management bylaw, that's something that Councillor McKinnon and I had discussion with and to bring forward through MEASC, and we can follow up afterwards and sort of see where that's at. But absolutely, there are many things on the plate that need to be looked at, and the new council is going to have a discussion with their staff as to where we would like to put our resources for this municipality. So there's a lot at play here, and this presentation, as I stated earlier, while this council's term is wrapping up, we are still relevant, and this sets the stage for the next council to start looking at it. Mayor Rands, you were next.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this is probably the longest receipt motion that I've seen in a long time. And as for the next council, I think what we can refer to that is what they used to call baptism by fire.
Yes, very much so. Okay, if there's no more discussion on the receiving motion, I will call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. One last thing, we have the articles of correspondence brought into us on the Pinkston supplemental. Can I have a motion to receive? And again, these documents will also move forward with the presentations that have happened tonight. Move receipt by Councillor McKinnon, seconded by Mayor Rands. Call to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, can I have a motion, please, to adjourn the Planning Committee meeting, and we'll move on to Parks. Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor McKinnon. Call to question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.